Ambassador Leach opened with an interesting comment in the very beginning, talking about a better NATO, more NATO from the summit. I would actually add, it's also a renewed NATO, an affirmation of the alliance and what an alliance means for its members and for its neighbors. In many ways, the recent Russian aggression, yes, Russian aggression in Ukraine, in fact, let's not be poetic, it is war, full stop. But if we look at the events in Ukraine, the war, it is also a test of commitment of NATO to its members and to its partners. Therefore, I do want to highlight 5 new realities that have shaped the NATO summit. The first is looking at NATO's Readiness Action Plan. This eastward focus of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is about presence and projection, also of power. But it's also about readiness and, more importantly, reassurance. Reassurance for the members in terms of collective alliance. The second reality is one of deterrence, or a renewed focus on deterrence. This is both early warning and, unfortunately, something Armenia knows very well, hybrid warfare. To be honest, if we look at some of the recent statements by the president of one of our neighboring countries, hybrid warfare can also be expressed in presidential statements coming from Baku. What it's also about is rapid response. This NATO summit has accomplished something important in terms of a rapid, forceful, and robust response within 48 hours anywhere within NATO. From a military perspective, a 48-hour window for deployment is very fast and rapid. The third observation of a new reality is an objective realization. NATO alliance members and the NATO alliance itself is now at its highest state of readiness in history. Even beyond the Cold War period, NATO currently is at its highest level of readiness. The fourth observation is again an objective observation that of the NATO member states, the NATO alliance is now the global leader in defense spending. Despite some shortcomings by some members, taken collectively, NATO, in the words of some NATO officials, is the largest investor and spender on defense in world history, more than the Roman or Greek empires. In other words, never before in history has such a collective, deep alliance with high readiness spent so much on defense. The fifth crucial reality or observation concerns the Republic of Armenia and the impressive decision by President Serge Sargsyan to attend this NATO summit. In many ways, it is the first time in over 5 years where the Armenians have participated in a NATO summit, perhaps long overdue, but we must give credit where credit is due, and both welcome and praise the Armenian president for going to the NATO summit. But what it represents is beyond the Armenian president. It represents a bigger accomplishment, an Armenian accomplishment, where the Republic of Armenia is no longer simply a consumer of security, but is now a contributor to regional and international security. With over 100 Armenian peacekeepers currently deployed and committed to staying in Afghanistan, this represents Armenia punching above its weight in enhanced strategic significance of tiny Armenia. What it also represents is what's called interoperability. Interoperability in many levels, not just the military technical, but interoperability as a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, as well as a member and contributor to NATO's Partnership for Peace. Armenia is, frankly, the only reliable security partner of the Russian Federation, and is increasingly a dependable and significant partner of the NATO alliance. But it's also, in many ways, about Sochi. It's about the Armenian president's constructive engagement in meeting not only with the French president, but also the US Secretary of State, in aligning Armenia with the goals and commitments of NATO itself, mainly that there is no military solution to protracted conflicts or to Nagorno-Karabakh specifically. Now, in conclusion, let's look at the outcomes. What's interesting was I'm perhaps one of 12 people in the world that actually read the summit declaration. I read it for this event, frankly, for no other reason. And among the 12 people on Earth, most of them are at this table. It's similar to who knows what's going on with the OSCE Minsk group. My point is, after reading the summit declaration, there are 15 separate points and articles pertaining to Ukraine and only Ukraine and Russian aggression. What's interesting is 4 points that were added at the very last minute to the declaration concerning what some NATO officials and Mr. Lahu called ISIL, or Islamic State. In Armenia, we are somewhat remote and removed from some trends and dangers, but we need to pay more attention to the threat to regional and international security that Islamic State represents. Mr. Nahabetyan is one of the few in the Armenian government who actually realizes this threat, given our vulnerability of Armenian diasporan communities in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere, Lebanon as well. But we need to pay closer attention and, as a contributor to international security, actually improve our own threat perception and avoid threat misperception. At the same time, a second observation from the summit declaration is the specific wording that applies in the declaration to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova. Regarding protracted conflicts, yes, but more importantly, the declaration has a stated commitment to the protection of the territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty of each of these countries. To be honest, I don't think this was a defeat for Armenian foreign policy. I think it's actually, in many ways, a bigger problem for Georgia in terms of protracted conflict as a new obstacle. But for Armenian foreign policy, I think Armenian foreign policy, despite recent criticisms, remains strong in this context. Also, one important factor that's underreported in the Armenian media is, despite the rhetoric from Turkey, the Turkish government diplomatically, during the NATO summit, did not actively support or lobby on behalf of Azerbaijan. This was also an interesting test of the new Turkish government. What we also see is a fourth and final interesting observation from the summit declaration and decisions. This was a renewed commitment to specific issues and priorities of significance for Armenia: cybersecurity, public diplomacy, but also partnership over membership or enlargement. Armenia is actually in many ways more realistic than other NATO partners. Armenia makes no theater or no claims to the contrary that we aspire to what's best for Armenia now. It's not NATO membership, it's partnership. This is a much more sincere and realistic commitment on behalf of consistent governments of the Republic of Armenia. Now, what's also interesting is Poland is the next host of the next NATO summit in 2016, and it will represent an important coming test of the new security environment with its eastward focus. And finally, if I may have sounded anti-Putin or anti-Russian, that's simply too bad. But what I really am is what's called pro-Armenian. In many ways, in this context, we forget it's not pro-Russian or pro-Western. It should be about pro-Armenian. And we tend to forget that in political debate and discourse in today's Armenia. And in conclusion, it's also important to say that there is no conclusion, given the dynamic insecurity and instability around us, and the nature of threats daily, as well as the important elements that all of our speakers noted. The significance of the NATO summit for Armenia was well beyond the military. It was also political, it was economic, it was diplomatic, and it's an important way to address our paramount insecurity and threat, which is internal, not external. Whether it's oligarchic structures, economic development, distorted or insufficient democracy. These are important tools that NATO offers for us to capacity build, or as NATO likes to call it, integrity building. Yes, we need to build, and we need a lot more integrity.